at paragraph 74 of Mr.
Yes.
Mklangu's affidavit,
Yes.
at page 908
Yes.
of bundle 8, dealing with the meeting with Mr. Kona.
Yes.
I just wanted to share with you what Mr. Kona's evidence was about this meeting. He testified before this commission. Chairperson, you'll recall, in February of 2020, some time ago.
And who was that?
Mr. Kona. Mr. Kona.
Oh, okay.
Now, at the time of this meeting, in October of 2012, Mr. Kona was the chairperson of SAA, and I think also the acting CEO. And what he said is that Mr. Mklangu arranged this meeting. He went off and he went to the Saxonwell compound. He said that when he arrived there, he was asked to turn in his cell phone. And present at the meeting was himself, Mr. Mklangu, Mr. Shepo Mahashula, and Duduzani Zuma, and Tony Gupta. And he said, well, he was congratulated on his appointment, and he was welcomed to the family. And somewhere along the line, Mr. Tony Gupta said to him that we know that you haven't been paid. He hadn't been paid both as acting CEO and chairperson. And this is what Mr. Kona then says. This was at page 93 of the transcript on date 206. He says Mr. Kona, we know you have not been paid. Here is 100,000 rand. But we are just welcoming you to the family. We look after each other. He goes on to say, yes, so Chair, I look at Tony and say, okay, but you do not need to pay me money. What are you paying me this money for? I do not need the money, I'm okay. Then he looks at me cynically and says, what kind of guy are you refusing this money? And he says to me, no, here's 500,000. And he went on to say that Mr. Tony Gupta took the 100,000 rand out of a drawer in cash. And he assumed that if he had agreed to take the 500, he would have just reached into another drawer and taken out that much cash. And then he concluded his evidence by stating that the meeting then turned to the business of the day. And he was asked about a consulting contract. And in the run-up to this contract, Lufthansa Consulting had been chosen over McKinsey to provide a turnaround strategy. And when Mr. Kona told Tony Gupta that he had appointed, or that Lufthansa Consulting would be appointed, the meeting all of a sudden came to an end. But before he left, a telephone call was placed to the DG of the Department of Public Enterprises. And it was stated to this person over the phone that he should come there quickly and explain what was going on. Mr. Kona then left the meeting, and he was subsequently phoned by the DG, who asked him, why did you give this contract to Lufthansa? So that's what Mr. Kona, what his evidence was. Do you have any comment on that?
Just finishing notes, sorry. Chairperson. Yes, thank you. Chairperson, one of the things which I have explained earlier is how not only these, but other business people tended to embellish their credentials by claiming or by name dropping. Now, I don't know what they meant by welcome to the family, and I'm very happy that Mr. Kona refused to take the money which was placed to him. It's precisely this type of conduct, among others, that led to the decision on my part to just begin cooling off relations until I cut them out altogether. I became aware of this, I think, not the exact detail during the query, but the exact detail, I became aware of it after Mr. Conner's evidence before the commission that he had been offered amounts to the tune of 500,000 rand. I cannot confirm that it happened, but it's what was presented before the commission. Now, I wouldn't know where this money was taken out of, and it certainly could never have been true that he had not been paid as a chairperson and acting CE, because in all honesty, SAA would have had money to pay their acting CE and their board members. So that would not have been true. I don't know what it meant.
Well, I imagine that one possibility might have been administrative issues, because it does happen, does it not? Well, maybe not just in government, but maybe in the private sector, that something goes wrong, and when people are expecting to be paid on a particular day, the money doesn't come in, and it's not necessarily because there's no money. It might be maybe details were finished late or whatever. That kind of thing does happen. That comes to my mind as having, as a possibility if one listens to that story. I know that the staff of the commission, I'm aware that in recent months, some have been getting their salaries after the dates when they are supposed to get it. Sometimes they don't get it at all. So I'm simply saying it might not be that when he says he had not been paid, he means SAA didn't have the money to pay. One doesn't know. I don't know how soon the meeting was after he became acting CE. There may well have been administrative delays. I'm not sure. I'm just mentioning something that comes to my mind.
It's certainly, Chairperson, I think in this case the difficulty would be that Mr. Kona was the acting CE, and therefore he would have had authority. And as, if my recollection serves me well, SAA had been given a government guarantee earlier in 2012, and so they did have some liquidity to be able to pay salaries. I don't recall in 2012 there being problems at SAA with regard to paying salaries timeously. So, and I don't recall being told of admin glitches with regard to the payment of salaries. So I wouldn't know what this meant.
Okay.
So And then with regard to the consulting contract for the turnaround strategy, I unfortunately was not involved in the awarding of this contract and all the nitty-gritties that were involved in it. I had, as I've explained on several occasions, I had kept myself as far away from contract issues and tenders as possible, precisely so that I do not get implicated in any possible way, even before I knew that there would be this commission. I had kept myself as far away from tenders and contract issues, as I said earlier, including where I was being canvassed to influence the department in one way or the other. I would remember, Chairperson, in 2014 when I returned to Home Affairs, when I was asked by, 2014, when I was being asked to assist in the resolution of the legal dispute between Home Affairs and one IT company. My response to the then Treasurer General of the ANC was that the matter is in court. As a minister, I should not get involved because I would be undermining the court case of the department, and therefore I suggest that we let the matter be resolved at that level. I have taken the same approach even with regard to this. I know that the question is not asking whether I was involved. I think the question seeks to know if I was aware of this and what my comment would be. Certainly the Department of Public Enterprises would not be involved. If it was, I've never been alerted to this, it would have been wrong for it to involve itself in deciding issues of contract and tenders within a particular entity, because in the end, it is that entity which must account for whatever decisions they have taken through its accounting officer.
Perhaps I could just pick up on the last point and then go back. Mr. Kona continued his evidence to say that a few days after this, he got a letter from Public Enterprises saying that they wanted to investigate the award of the contract to Lufthansa. He says there was an investigation conducted and no fault was found, but he says that they still wouldn't allow me to appoint Lufthansa Consulting to start the work. Do you know anything about that?
No, I'm not aware of it. I wasn't aware of a letter from the Department of Public Enterprise Chairperson and the investigations which took place in that regard.
And then in relation to the salary issue, Mr. Kona was asked, well, how did Tony Gupta know about this? And he said, well, I assumed that the advisor knows because our pay is approved by the ministry. And then he was asked, did you find it strange at the time that he knew the status of payment of your salary? Mr. Kona said, absolutely. No, his knowledge was, it just baffled me because I was told by the minister advisor that he is an important stakeholder. So his level of knowledge seemed extraordinary when I got their thoughts of the events that are happening.
Chairperson, to my recollection, the minister did not approve the salary of an acting CE. If I'm not mistaken, and I'm subject to correction, an acting CE would earn the salary of the resigned CE, and that didn't need ministerial approval. I think, therefore, this matter would not have come to my office at all. And even then, salaries are not I think on a much broader scale. Salaries of CEs, of SOEs are not approved by the minister. The board sets the salary of the CE. What did happen, I think, between 2013 and 14, and I don't know when it was resolved, because by the time I left public enterprises, this had not yet been resolved. What did happen is that we began an independent investigation into the salary scales of the CEs, of the SOEs in our portfolio, including their long and short-term incentives. This had been prompted by concerns, among others, that the CEs of SOEs were earning large salaries, much larger than that of the president, and secondly, that in many instances, or some, but in many, the awarding of incentives by boards to executive directors was taking place regardless of the fact that the executive directors had performed well and met the KPIs. The question then that was being asked was, how do we set this? So when we undertook this investigation, Cabinet felt that we needed to expand it to all SOEs. And the department engaged the services of a certain company, unfortunately I can't remember the name of the company now, that did that, that was doing that investigation, or did that investigation. And SAA, among others, was identified as a mid-level SOE. And the argument was that the salary scale of the SAA CEO was above the scale which they were supposed to be earning. But it's a matter that got resolved after I had left the department. So at the time of Mr. Corner acting, and if I'm not mistaken, it didn't act for very long, because I think subsequent, around 2013, a new CE, Mr. Kalawe, was appointed. So when Mr. Corner was acting as CE, the salary had already been determined at the level and scale of the previous resigned CEO that had not needed my approval. So if anybody knew about it, it would probably, because either the matter is public or somebody has leaked or disclosed that information, it certainly didn't come from me or from the processes that officially involved my office.
Did Mr. Mhlangu tell you about this?
No.
Would you have expected him to?
Well, I would have expected him to, but I guess seeing that, yeah, I would have expected him to, especially the offer of this cash benefit. But perhaps he decided not to disclose it because it eventually did not happen. Mr. Corner refused to take it.
So as you sit now, assuming that this is correct, what is your comment of this behavior on the part of the Guptas?
I think I have indicated, Chairperson, that it was such type of behavior that began to concern us, and me particularly, because of my friendship with Mr. Achi, and I began to view this conduct, the name dropping, and a number of other things as quite disconcerting. And I think that it led eventually to me cooling and subsequently cutting off my relationship with them.
And what other, well, you say you weren't aware of this, so what concerns were raised with you or came onto your radar that caused you to make that decision?
As I've just said, Chairperson, among others, the public, the issues which were emanating from the media, concerns about the pervasive influence of this family, the name dropping, particularly of the president. I think it was our responsibility to protect the name of the president from anybody claiming anything about the president, and the name dropping of other ministers, and the issues that were being raised. So it really did concern.
But was any investigation, was there ever any consideration given to an investigation into the Guptas?
By who?
By government?
No. To my recollection, no. I think that happened, I suppose, after the Public Protector's report in 2016, as the Chairperson pointed out.
Now, I just wanted to try and find the date in your affidavit when you say you cooled down your relationship with the Guptas. Was that, to the best of your recollection, was that in 2013 or 2014?
It began in 2013, Chair.
Maybe Mr. Mybeck was still going to mention this. Maybe you should be told that in his affidavit, which may be another affidavit, not this one, Mr. Mahlangu denies Mr. Kona's version that Mr. Tony Gupta offered him money. So I just mentioned that he obviously admits the meeting,
yes,
as he does, but he denies that part. So I thought I would just mention that.
Thank you, Chair.
All right.
Well, let me ask this question about Mr. Mahlangu having organized or facilitated that meeting. Do you know any reason why he wouldn't say to somebody, whether it was Tony Gupta or whoever, who wanted to meet with a CEO or any official of an SOE, do you know of any reason why he wouldn't say, contact them directly, and rather than him facilitating these meetings and going to the extent of attending the meeting? I mean, I ask myself the question, why must he attend that meeting? Maybe there is a reason, but I'm just inquiring from you why he wouldn't say, well, Mr. Tony Gupta, maybe this is the number for Mr. Kona. If you wish to see him, to meet with him, arrange with his office.
I wouldn't know the reason, Chairperson. My presumption would be that he probably wanted to hear what was being discussed, so that if it had anything that he would need to intervene in or, alert me about, then he would do so. I don't necessarily think that there was any motive for him being there that was in favor of the people that the said CEO was meeting with. But secondly, Chairperson, with regard to facilitating the meetings, he did facilitate quite a number of meetings. I think, as he admitted in his own affidavit, that he did facilitate a number of meetings. He did sit and listen to people, and he would do so only professionally. And I don't think that he expected out of those meetings to be any outcomes that were outside the legal or procurement framework, either of government or the existing SOE.
My concern about it is this, that him being your legal advisor, special advisor, his facilitation of the meetings and his presence in some of those meetings could lend a certain credence or credibility as if that interaction is approved by yourself.
Yes.
And that what is being said or whatever is being initiated has got your blessing, even if it might not have. But the people who say, could you please facilitate this meeting, probably they know why they're not phoning those people directly. Maybe they think, well, if I phone the CEO directly, he might refuse. But if he gets a call from the minister's advisor, he's unlikely to refuse, even to come to meet in my house, yes, rather than us meeting at SAA. So that's the concern that arises from me, to say, why should these people not arrange directly? Why do they need the minister's advisor? Why does the minister's advisor get involved? You understand? I
understand you perfectly, Chairperson, and I understand the implications of their involvement. I guess just to make 2 quick points in that regard. One is that I think there are important lessons because at the time there was, you know, when you become appointed as a minister, there is no induction to the extent that you need to watch out for the following things. I think just basic induction, you know, that assists you because you are new to the office, especially if you are coming into office for the first time. And so there isn't that type of induction that says, look, watch out for these things. If this happens, the implications could be this. If that happens, the implications could be this. And it would compromise the integrity of the institution. But secondly, I think it became important and was a timely intervention to adopt this legislation, which, in terms of which, if somebody says, I have a donation to make, can you meet with me? You say to them, the party is funded through the Democracy Fund in Parliament, and therefore anything else, your donation doesn't necessarily have to be tied to you being assisted with meetings or whatever, and it has to be disclosed, and it will be disclosed. Go to the Treasurer General, and that's how it's going to be handled. So I think that has assisted a great deal, because at the time it didn't exist, and we were basically, you know, functioning without that type of guidance and framework, which just made life rather difficult when you look at it from hindsight.
Well, I know that you denied Mr. Saluji's version that he met with you at the Gupta residence, yes, and I think Tony Gupta introduced him to you. Yes. But if it is true that that meeting took place, it may well be that even in that context, Tony Gupta was trying to send a message to Mr. Saluji to say, you see, we are close to the minister, to your minister. You know, he's here at our house. As I say, I know that you have said that meeting did not take place, but I'm just saying, if that version is true of Mr. Saluji, it may well be that is that kind of situation, and it may be something that is consistent with name dropping that you say you became concerned about.
Yes, with the exception, Chairperson, as you correctly say, that I was not at that meeting.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. Mr. Maybeck?
Yes, I was going to just point out the similarities between the two meetings, but I think that's been dealt with. I just wanted to add to what the chairperson asked you about, and that is that Mr. Kona's evidence was that when Mr. Mklangu approached him to have this meeting, he told him he's very busy, and he wanted to know why these people couldn't come to his office. And Mr. Mklangu said, no, this is now urgent, we have to go there. Do you have any comment on that?
No, Chairperson, I wouldn't know what was the urgency of going there, because my expectation would be that the meeting would take place at SAA office, where Mr. Kona was in his environment. And then perhaps just one last thing, Mr. Gigaba, if we can get your comment on this, leaving aside the question of the money and the bribe. I mean, would it be appropriate for somebody like Mr. Gupta to get hold of Mr. Mklangu and say, I want you to arrange a meeting for me with Kona to discuss the award of the consulting contract? Would that fall within the bounds of him managing the relationship for you?
Of course not. Of course not. And I don't think Mr. Mahlangu himself would have approached that matter with an expectation, unless Mr. Kona says Mr. Mahlangu contacted him afterwards to say, actually review this as it has been suggested. I think he then says the letter came and the processes came from the department afterwards. But of course, Mr. Mahlangu would have been wrong to have sought to instruct a CEO of an SOE with regard to a contract.
I don't know whether, Mr. Maybeck, you have any recollection whether what Mr. Mahlangu says was discussed at that meeting, whether he admits that what was discussed is what Mr. Kona said was discussed. Because I would imagine, Mr. Gigaba, that Mr. Mahlangu would have wanted to know what the meeting was about before he could go there. So if he attended the meeting and if he facilitated the meeting, one expects that he would have known what it was about. Of course, we don't have Tony Gupta's version of what was discussed. We do have Mr. Kona's version. I think Mr. Maybeck doesn't think that Mr. Mahlangu has told us what was discussed at the meeting, or he might not recall. But Mr. Kona is quite clear what was discussed. And if it is true that what was discussed was what Mr. Kona says was discussed, it seems that it would be inappropriate for him to facilitate such a meeting and even attend.
Yes, I think, Chairperson, it would be fair to ask Mr. Mahlangu to comment on that meeting in particular, and its contents thereof.
Yeah, he has filed an affidavit. It's just that I don't know where to find it immediately. He has given a version, but I don't seem to recall. I seem to think he denies even the discussion of the Lufthansa entity, that contract. I may be wrong about that, but he certainly denies the issue of the money. But Mr. Kona has been clear as to what was discussed. Mr. Maibek?
I will ask my colleague to try and find that as we go along.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We don't have to resolve it now.
No.
Yeah.
Can we then, well, let's move to another topic, and that is my trip to India in January 2011 at page 909.
Yes.
We've dealt with this before. I just want to take you through what Mr. Matlangu has to say. At paragraph 93, in January 2011, at the invitation of Ranesh Gupta, I travelled to India to attend the wedding of one of his family members. At the time, I'd only met Ranesh Gupta twice, first in December 2011 after the minister briefed me about the Gupta family and tasked me to manage them, and the second time in January 2011, presumably that should be 2012. Or the December should be 10, I suspect. Is that right?
Probably, I think December should be 10, yeah.
10. On both occasions, I met with him in the course of my duties. I did not have any personal relationship with him when he invited me to the wedding. 94, to the best of my recollection, Rajesh Gupta covered the expenses for the trip. Because I did not consider this a social excursion and was not friends with Ranesh Gupta, I would not have undertaken the trip at my own expense. Then at 95, I disclosed this invitation to the minister. I annex a copy of my email to the minister dated 18 January 2011, which we went through last time, in which I informed the minister of the trip and sought his approval to undertake it. Perhaps I could just ask you to turn to that email. There's just one question I want to raise with you. At page 920, the first bullet point. Although this is a private excursion, it promises to be of great political value. I therefore suggest that we take full advantage of it. Want to comment on that?
As I said in my previous response to this paragraph, Chairperson, the trip was a private excursion. It had no political value, great or less.
Well, Mr. Matlangu, you accept, had a different view. He says it promises to be of great political value.
It had no political value, Chairperson. So it was an opinion here in January 2011, and as he says in his affidavit, it was just a huge wedding. He spent very little time with Mr. Rajesh Gupta, and only saw him at the organized events, which were large and not conducive to any social or other serious discussion. So at the time he received the invitation, he thought it was of great political value. At the invitation, at the wedding itself, he realized that it was just simply a wedding with, he says, which was not conducive to any social or other serious discussions.
Yes, but at the time that he received the invitation, did you think it would be of great political value for him to attend?
No. The invitation was clear that it's a wedding.
So you were happy for him to go to the wedding?
I think, as I've indicated, Chairperson, I did not respond to this email. I did not respond to him, and I said that it was, in hindsight, it was an oversight on my part to not have said to him, there is no great political value, don't go to it. But the email which he sent me, and perhaps that's where I should have exercised greater caution, contained a whole lot of things. And I just didn't think it was worth responding to. It contained a whole lot of things, not only about the wedding, it was about the GCE of Transnet, the Gamma issue, meeting senior editors, and so on. So my response to the question, Chairperson, is that I did not think it contained any value. Perhaps the only mistake I made was not in responding to it to say to him, don't go. But I would have had to respond to all the other issues which he had raised in the memo, in the email which he had sent me.
Mr. Gigaba, if you had been invited to this wedding, would you have gone?
No.
So then on what basis did you allow Mr. Matlangu to go? Or put differently, why did you not stop him from going?
As you say, I did not allow him to go. I say I did not respond to the email, which he probably presumed to be permission for him to travel. I did not respond to the email.
And then he says at 96, at page 909, I considered the trip of strategic political importance to the minister, as did he, because it was important to understand the Gupta family as part of the responsibility that the minister had tasked me with.
Chairperson, I did not consider this to be of strategic political importance, not at all. It was a wedding, it was a wedding invitation. He thought that it was important to understand the family. They were important stakeholders in the ANC. It was his initial, because as he says, he did not know them prior to 2010, prior to December 2010. Now, taking from the briefing I had given him, where I had said they are one of the important stakeholders of the ANC, he presumed them to be, he presumed this invitation to be of strategic political importance to me. It actually was not. And I did not respond, because if I thought it was, I would have responded to him to say, oh yes, indeed, it's a great opportunity. Please do travel. But I did not respond. I say the oversight on my part was on not responding to that particular aspect of the email, which resulted in him traveling and finding out when he was far away that in actual fact this is just a big wedding.
Now, at page 933, you respond to paragraph 8.4 by saying, Mr. Matlangu disclosed the invitation to attend the wedding, and I did not have an objection to it.
By saying I did not have an objection to it, I meant I did not respond. I did not respond to say to him, don't go. And that's why I continue in the next sentence to say, in hindsight, I don't see any purpose which was to be served by him attending a private wedding.
What page is that, Mr. Myberg?
At page 933, Chairperson, paragraph 8.4.
Okay. Yes, you may continue.
I just wanted to ask you in relation to this. I understood your evidence, and you must correct me if I'm wrong, at the previous sitting, to initially have been that you didn't know what Mr. Matlangu was going to do in India.
He had disclosed the invitation to the wedding. I understood it to be a wedding. Celebration, music, dance, food, whatever else, but what political purpose would be served in attending a wedding? I've attended many weddings. I've not been at a wedding where politics was discussed.
I just want to read to you a passage of your previous evidence, where I asked you, so did you inquire what he was doing in India? So as I've indicated, I did not ask him. I gained the impression, just correct me if I'm wrong, that your testimony before was that you didn't know what he went to do in India.
No.
Did you always know that he was going to attend a wedding?
He had sent me, Chairperson, may I refer you to SM17?
Yes.
First paragraph, if I may read, if I may
The
quote.
email.
The email, yes.
Yeah.
I have been invited on a trip to India.
Yes.
Although this is a private excursion, it promises to be of great political value.
Yes.
Now, I understood it to be just that. No political purpose. It's a private excursion. I think I had heard that it was going to be a wedding. So I left it at that because I did not respond to it. I didn't think that a wedding is of any significance, is of any political significance.
And perhaps before we move off, was Mr. Mahlangu then paid by the state whilst he went on this, as he calls it, sojourn to India?
As I said in my previous response, Chairperson, that no other than me talking to him afterwards and saying you should not have gone, there is no other penalty that was imposed on him. I just indicated to him that you shouldn't have gone on this trip, and in future we should be careful not to undertake trips of this nature, and that was it. It ended up there with an apology on his part. I did not even put it in writing. I had an oral discussion with him.
So I take it then he was paid?
He was.
All right.
Was it appropriate that your advisor should go on a trip with a family, private family, and be away from work, I think for about a week, if I'm not mistaken, and be paid by the state for a time that he was not working? He was maybe having a good time in India.
Chairperson, I think I have said, in hindsight, I should have said no to the trip. And I did reprimand him afterwards. I think if there was a need for an additional penalty, the benefit of hindsight is that it allows you to view things from a different perspective from the time when they happened. Maybe we would have said to him, for this week that you were away, we shall deduct from your salary. But at the time, we did not.
Because you see, it's not a penalty. If you had not paid him, if the department had not paid him for that week that he was away, I don't know if it was 7 days or 5 days or even 10, I think it was less than 10. You are entitled to be paid if you have worked. That's the principle. That's why the other side of the coin is, if you have not worked, you won't be paid. That is obviously subject to a leave situation. If you have applied for leave or you are on leave, that's different. There is a statutory regime for that. But if you don't work, you don't get paid. So what we have here is a situation where your advisor goes away to India, and to the extent that he was not working or he was not there to perform any official duties, he shouldn't have been paid for the days that he was there. Would you agree?
Well, perhaps, Chairperson, that should have happened. It just didn't happen at the time.
No, I understand when you say it didn't happen, but I'm just asking whether you go along with the idea that it should have happened.
It should have happened, Chairperson, but I guess above it, the trip should not have been undertaken.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I know that...
And if I don't disrupt the chair, I think both Mr. Mahlangu and I both agree, because he also, his own assessment is that the trip was of no value. And I say in my response that in hindsight, there was no purpose to be served by this trip. And I have said that it was an oversight on my part not to have said to him, no, don't go.
Mr.
And
Mayberg?
would you accept as well that it was inappropriate for Mr. Mahlangu's trip to have been paid for by the Guptas?
It was inappropriate, Chairperson, but it was them who had invited him to the wedding. There have been many instances where people have been invited to soccer, international sports tournaments, and so on by private business people or companies, and the trips were paid for by those companies. I think our response in an organized fashion should cover all such instances so that we prevent the possibility of people undertaking trips even when they have applied for leave being paid for. Because if somebody says to you, there is the Euros 2020, we've got tickets for you for the semi-finals and the finals. The semi-finals will be in that country, the finals will be in another country, we'll pay for your trip, we'll pay for the flights and accommodation. There have been many instances where government officials previously have accepted those invitations and gone on those trips. I think our response should be organized to be able to deal with all such instances, not only this one.
Mr. Mayberg?
Thank you. Can I ask you then, please, to turn to page 915. I want to deal with the appointment of Mr. Nintani as a director.
I'm sorry, Mr.?
Nintani.
Oh, okay. You're moving away from
Yes,
from
I'm
this.
moving to
okay,
page
before you move
915.
away,
Yes.
let me ask this question, Mr. Gigaba. You said that when Mr. Mayberg drew your attention to a paragraph in your affidavit where you dealt with this trip.
Yes, 8.4.
Yeah, well, page 933. Yeah, paragraph 8.4. You say in that paragraph, Mr. Mahlangu disclosed the invitation to attend the wedding, and I did not have an objection to it. In hindsight, I do not see any purpose which was to be served by him attending a private wedding. You said that when you said you had no objection to it, you meant that you, let me not try and put words in your mouth. Please remind me what you said that meant.
That I had not firmly said to him, don't go. I mean,
Yes.
I did not respond to the email which he had sent me, which I guess he presumed to be an approval on my part for him to go, to travel.
Now, when you gave evidence last time about this trip, and I think you have hinted at it again, you said when he came back, you reprimanded him.
Yes.
Now, my difficulty with having said that you had no objection to it and having said you reprimanded him is that my understanding would be that if you had no objection to it, you would otherwise be meaning that you saw nothing wrong with it. And then if he went on the basis that you had no objection to it, why would you reprimand him when he came back?
As I have said, Chairperson, repeatedly, that by saying I had no objection to it, I meant I did not respond to his email to put it firmly to him that he should not travel, which he then would have read to mean that I approve of the trip. Having traveled, and on his return, I then reprimanded him because even the Chief of Staff was not aware that he had undertaken such a trip.
So were you the only one who was aware that he had undertaken the trip?
He had sent the email to me. I don't know if he had spoken to anybody else.
Okay. Now, I would have thought that if you had seen something wrong, you certainly would have spoken to him at the time. And that the fact that you didn't react to his letter must mean that at that stage you didn't see anything wrong. So, which might coincide with my understanding of no objection when I read your affidavit. I understood it in that sense, to say you saw it, you didn't see any reason, anything wrong with it, and therefore you didn't say don't go. And is that interpretation, does it not reflect what your thinking was at the time?
No, it doesn't, Chairperson. It doesn't reflect.
Yeah.
My interpretation is the one that I have presented before the Commission,
Yes.
on several occasions now.
But at that time, did you see anything wrong with the trip? At the time when you read his email to you?
I did not apply my mind to the trip, Chairperson.
Yes.
I mean, to the email.
Yes.
I did not apply my mind to the email. It just was an email which came usually around the 18th of January. We would have, it's quite a busy period for us politically, the beginning of January. Because on the one hand, you're preparing for the anniversary celebrations of the African National Congress. As soon as you come back from there, you are preparing for the NEC Lekgotla of the ANC. A week from there, it's the Cabinet Lekgotla it's the Cabinet Lekgotla, and thereafter, you are preparing for the opening of Parliament. It's a busy period. A whole lot of things can just miss your attention.
Which says to me, it's all the more reason why you should have been reluctant to let your advisor be away for 5 days on something that you might or not have regarded as important.
As I say, Chairperson, the mistake I made was not in responding to the email. I should have responded to the email. I did not respond to it. I got carried away by the many things that I was doing at the time. But realizing that he had traveled, I had a discussion with him and reprimanded him afterwards. And so I took the matter to have been dealt with.
When you reprimanded him, what is it that in your view he had done wrong, or Yeah, what was it that, in your view, you were reprimanding him for doing or not doing?
It was Chairperson going on the trip. It was, not communicating well with me and with the Chief of Staff. And as I've said, going on the trip itself. Because my view was that, there was no purpose to be served in him. There was no great political significance or value from attending a wedding. And he should have communicated better so that, because at the time I would be busy with a lot of things. A lot could just escape my attention. It's better that you familiarize me better. We sit down, we talk, we review everything and decide that yes or no, you can do this or you shouldn't do it. Because usually at the time you spend most of the time away from the office because there is just so much happening with the Mahutla and January 8th preparations, which are sometimes after January 8th itself.
But is my understanding correct from your previous evidence that you are not saying you were not aware before he left that he was going to leave? It's just that you didn't respond to the email, but you were aware, and when he was not around, you knew that he had asked to go, and that's why he was not around. But you dealt with the issue when he came back.
I was aware, Chairperson, on the basis of the email.
Yeah.
When he was not around, it dawned on me that, oh, by the way, there had been this email, and I had not responded to it. He presumed that non-response to be approval, and then he traveled. So I had a discussion with him upon his return, and we discussed all of them.
Okay, Mr. Maybeck.
Thank you. I want to then, as I mentioned, deal with the appointment of Mr. Nintani as a director of SAA. This is something dealt with, if I can ask you to turn to page 915. At paragraph 178, Ranesh Gupta claimed that Dr. Nintani had strong links with the Congress Party and the government of India. According to him, Nintani had the potential or capacity to improve SAA's relations with the government and people of India. SAA ran a route from Sao Paulo to Mumbai via Johannesburg. The Johannesburg-Mumbai leg of the route had caused SAA serious losses. This was attributed partly to challenges with its landing and time slots in India, so much so that its passengers had difficulty connecting to their last destinations when they landed in Mumbai. SAA at the time also needed to attract more customers from India to render the Mumbai route profitable. I received Dr. Ntani's CV on these bases and deposited it with the department. Did you know anything about that?
I was not aware. Chairperson, I have explained, I think, in paragraph, I've explained in paragraph 103 the processes of the appointment of the appointments of the boards, because I did not get involved. I think there would be one instance where I asked for certain candidates to be considered. I think it was Ms. Chichi Maponya, Professor Zanele Mgadi, and two other people. I think, I can't remember, I think it was for the board of SAA, or so, I can't remember. But generally, I was not involved in the appointments of the boards. I would be informed when the decision memos, sometimes it would be through the decision memo that would come to me from the department, or it would be through the department when we prepare for an AGM, when we are sitting now looking at the AGM, the proceedings of the AGM, and if there has to be board changes, then the department would say, Minister, we're proposing either it's time for a new board because the term of office of the current board is lapsing by the time of the AGM, or they would say to me that we are proposing that we add certain skills that are required on the board in order to beef the board up, or we must retire certain people because the board evaluation report is suggesting something else, that certain people must be removed because they are not giving attention to the board, or they have a conflict of interest or something like that. So, so the issue of Nintani arose in the context of the presentations to me and the people to be considered. The argument in 178 is known to me only to the extent that it deals with the challenges that SAA was facing on its Sao Paulo, Johannesburg, Mumbai route, the challenges with the landing slots, and the need for us, because at the time what the department said was that, recommended, was that we need to find somebody on the board who would assist us to influence the Indian government to get better landing slots in India, so that we can assist SAA to make the route profitable.
So I understand you to then be saying that you didn't know anything about Mr. Mahlangu's interaction with Rajesh Gupta in relation to Dr. Nintani.
I think I'm trying to I didn't know of his interaction with Rajesh in that regard.
Then at 179, Dr. Nintani is a scientist. The challenge I had with that was that his CV did not make it readily apparent that he had links with the Indian government, which could be of use to SAA and address the issue I referred to above issues I referred to above facing SAA in India. It bothered me that his value to SAA was not readily apparent. Then at paragraph 180, shortly before Dr. Ntani's CV came before Cabinet, I raised these misgivings separately with the Minister and Rajesh Gupta. I asked for proof from Rajesh Gupta to support the claim that Dr. Ntani could deliver favorable terms for SAA in India. That is how I received the emails from Mr. Chwala, which elaborated on Dr. Ntani's ability to serve SAA in India. You know anything about this?
I don't know anything, Chairperson, about... I only became aware of the emails from Mr. Chawla from the processes of the Commission. The concerns about Dr. Nintani, I don't recall if Mr. Mahlangu did raise his misgivings to me about Nintani. I don't recall if he had raised those misgivings with me. No, don't.
But would you have any reason to think he would say he did raise them with you if he didn't?
No, I don't have any reason to make any presumptions in this regard. Neither, Chairperson, should any inference be made on my non-recollection of him raising misgivings about Nintani, because the people who were being recommended for boards would have had to be vetted. I think for a long time, there were several challenges with regard to the board of SAA. One was getting somebody who would assist to influence India. The second was resolving the Johannesburg, Beijing route and influencing the Chinese government to give us better landing slots. The third would have been getting on the board somebody with aviation expertise. And it proved really difficult to find people who would fill in those gaps.
But of somebody who would influence, for example, the Indian government to assist SAA as if it's a legitimate and valid factor to take into account in deciding whether somebody should be appointed as a member of the SAA board. I'm not sure that I understand why it should be, because the impression it gives to me, and maybe it's a wrong impression, the impression it gives to me is that you were looking for somebody who would privately influence the Indian government. Because if that was not the thinking, if the normal channels would be used and the normal forms of communication would be used, then one would expect that you shouldn't necessarily be looking for that type of person. You should be looking for people who can put a sound argument why SAA should be dealt with in a certain way. Is there anything you can say to help me understand why,
Unfortunately,
you say, now we've got a CA in the board of SAA, we've got a senior counsel, we've got an engineer, now we need somebody who is going to influence the Indian government. I have some difficulty with understanding whether that's a legitimate factor.
Unfortunately, Chairperson, it becomes a legitimate factor. One of the reasons why the SAA route to Beijing had to be shut down was because we just simply could not find a way to influence the Chinese government to give us better landing slots. So SAA passengers in Beijing would arrive at an inconvenient time for them to be able to connect to other parts of Southeast Asia or other parts of China, which meant people preferred not to use SAA and rather used other airlines. And therefore, because SAA could not optimize on the route, they decided to shut it down. With regard to India, it's been a long engagement between India and South Africa on how to optimize the Mumbai Johannesburg route, because what SAA offered was an additional advantage of connecting to Sao Paulo. So when it came to trying to negotiate better landing slots, you don't only rely on the skills of your negotiators, you also rely on your ability to influence over and above the negotiation. It seemed to be the practice that you needed people of that influence, either serving on your board or being your international advisors in relation to specific or to certain routes. And that was the case. If we had found somebody with the requisite skill, we would have made great progress in regard to this. But it turned out that Dr. Nintani was not what had been sold to us.
Mr. Mayback.
Chairperson, I just want to go back to Mr. Kona. I don't know if there's a need for me to deal with this with Mr. Gigaba.
That's fine, yeah.
But you raised the question of what Mr. Mhlangu's version was. I have found the references. Perhaps I could just give them to you.
Yeah.
You will recall that we put up the whole of Mr. Mtlangu's affidavit in advance of the last sitting that you find in Bundle 7A. Whereas what we're dealing with now are those portions that were given to Mr. Gigaba in the 3-3 process.
Yeah.
Mr. Kona, at page 996.161, deals with the meeting at the Gupta residence. And he deals with that from 996.161 through to 996.165.
Do we need to go there, or it will be enough if you read to us?
I just really want to place those references on record and then to confirm that your recollection was correct. He did deny that there was an offer to pay him the 100,000 and the 500,000. And in answer to your question about what
he said was discussed.
He said was the subject of the meeting. He says at paragraph 234 that the meeting at the Gupta residence did not involve the Lufthansa consulting contract as suggested by Kona. 235, Mr. Gupta was preoccupied by the desire to increase TNA's subscription. So that's his version of what the business was of the day.
Yes. Well, there might be, in principle, a slight difference, or there might not be any slight difference. He wanted to, even on Mr. Mahlangu's version, Tony Gupta discussed his proposal or request or suggestion that SAA should increase the business that they were doing with them in terms of TNA, new age. Okay, all right.
So, Mr. Gigaba, can I then carry on with paragraph 181 at page 915? Mr. Mtlangu says, I do not remember whether I raised this concern with Rajesh Gupta telephonically or in person. Insofar as the minister is concerned, it is likely that I raised the concern with him in person. Accordingly, I do not believe that there are documents or other supportive means which I can place before the Commission as proof of the concerns I held at the time relating to Dr. Nintani's nomination to serve on the SAA board. I do not have any in my possession. Do you have any comment on that?
I also doubt if he raised this person with me in person. The issue of the appointments of the boards, as I have explained, would be dealt with through the departmental process. I expected that the departmental process would be robust enough to establish the suitability, the eligibility of people to serve on the board.
Sorry, Mr. Gigaba, it's the second time that there is something that is making that sound and disturbing us. Will somebody make sure it doesn't happen again? Okay, all right. Continue, Mr. Gigaba.
Thank you, Chairperson. So I'm saying I expected the departmental processes to be robust enough for them to be able to establish the suitability or eligibility of people to serve on the board. Because even if it was a recommendation that came from outside the existing database, that recommendation still had to be subjected to the same process of testing, of vetting, and establishing the suitability before a person is then taken forward.
But as you can see, Mr. Mtlangu said that he raised misgivings with you.
No, he says it is likely, which then provides the possibility that he also did not raise it with me. He is not sure.
No, what he says is likely is the form in which he raised it. Earlier on, he said he raised it with you. Now he is talking about whether he raised it telephonically or in person. What he is saying is not sure which one, whether it was telephonically or in person. But if you read it together with what he said earlier on, that he raised with you, he doesn't seem to doubt. He just doubts in which form he raised it with you.
If he did raise it with me, Chairperson, I had no capability to decide on anybody's suitability. There was an established process in the department through which appointments to boards were being dealt with. I was only the last resort when it came to this process. I was not the person to whom people came in the first resort.
But of course, he was your advisor. Would he not be entitled to advise you whether a particular person was suitable?
The advice, as he says in a previous paragraph, if you look at paragraph, I think it's 110 and 111, he says that, I think it's in relation to a concern which had been raised by Ms. Nkomo, and he says that the emails reflect, in paragraph 110, the last sentence, the emails reflect the nature of the minister's interaction with his special advisors on matters of board appointments, and goes further to say the minister accepted or rejected advice as it deemed appropriate. For instance, the minister rejected my advice about the removal of Mr. Andrew Mthembu as the chairperson of Infraco. The minister followed the contrary advice of the DDG and other staff members in the ministerial office. Similarly, in 2013, the minister accepted the advice of other colleagues to make an appointment to the SAA board over my advice to the contrary. Now, Chairperson, the advices that I would receive, if there is a process taking place in the department, you would not come to me and say, outside those processes, then I need to make a different determination. Because if that's the case, I might just as well have appointed entire boards without the department being involved and only just inform them that at this stage I've appointed the following people into the board of this entity or that one. That didn't happen. And it doesn't happen, in my understanding, even until now. Even if you come to me and say, I think this person is suitable, I will listen to you. I may agree or not agree, but the process has to go to the department. The name has to go to the department so that it is vetted properly, it is evaluated properly, its skills set is considered in conjunction with the skills matrix that has been established by the department for a board of a particular entity, and then a recommendation is made. In the instance that, for example, a recommendation comes to me which contains the name of a person that is unsuitable, the discretion is ultimately the minister's to say, I approve this collective as being recommended, or I suggest that this person be reconsidered and that one be added, that one be removed. But that too is subject to cabinet approval, because cabinet reserves the right to accept or reject the recommendations in totality or in part. And cabinet can very well say to you, remove these people, replace them with the following people, and this becomes the decision of the cabinet. Unless cabinet says that, no, replace the following people, find other people, and check them out if they are suitable, bring the matter back to cabinet. So even in this regard, even if somebody comes to me privately, in person, the process still is subject to, that recommendation still is subject to departmental processes, which are far more robust than relying on my personal opinion of a person whom I do not know, even if I knew the person.
But of course, if these misgivings had been raised with you, there would have been nothing stopping you from having a further look at Dr. Nintani.
If I did that, I would have to do it with every other recommendation that was brought to me with regard to board appointments. My procedural response would be raise it in the department with the people who deal with these processes, because they are better capable to take a decision on the matter and make a recommendation to me.
But Mr. Gigaba, wasn't this a bit of a unique situation? Because Mr. Nintani had been nominated by Rajesh Gupta.
Chairperson,
Just bear with me for a moment. Okay. On the face of these documents, Mr. Mahlangu then receives the CV, and that's given to the department. You're right, the process then no doubt unfolds, but becomes a point where he actually himself has misgivings about this. He has misgivings about the nomination, the provision of the CV. And he comes to you and he raises it as in his capacity as your special advisor. Surely if he had raised those misgivings in that context, you would have looked to revisit the issue.
Chairperson, since the name had not been recommended by me, then Mr. Mahlangu should have removed the name from consideration, because it was not my responsibility to then go to say, remove the name of this person from consideration, given the fact that the process was taking place away from me. And he was briefing me about one individual that he had the power to have removed from consideration in his engagements with the department. It is not uncommon that business and business organizations would make, that business people and business organizations would make recommendations. People nominate people to serve on boards. They nominate them. There have been many instances, including in the appointment of the board of SAA in 2017, the appointment of the board of ESCOM in 2018, where business individuals and business organizations actually made recommendations as to who should be appointed. I think then the suitability of those people is considered, and then the decision is made in that regard. So if Mr. Mahlangu had grave concerns about Dr. Nintani, I think he should have removed him from consideration altogether. He didn't need me because his nomination had not emanated from me.
But if I understand the chronology, and you must correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand 180, he says shortly before Dr. Ntani's CV came before Parliament, or came before Cabinet.
Yeah.
So wasn't it at that late stage? In other words, the process had unfolded, the vetting had been done. He then had his concerns and he raised them with you then. Would he have been able to withdraw Dr. Ntani's name himself at that stage?
Chairperson, the department, he should have gone back to the department to say, the memo you have, I don't know at what point this process was in terms of submission of the memo, whether the memo had already gone forward to cabinet. Because if I must withdraw a memo to cabinet, if the recommendation was, Minister, either withdraw the memo to cabinet or withdraw the following name, then I would have done so. But the process has been taken forward, and the people who dealt with this from the outset are not saying to me that through the DG, that Minister, we recommend that this that can you please indicate to Cabinet on this particular memo that this specific name must be expunged for the following reasons, and then we will come back to Cabinet with a new name. Had the DG come to me to say that, then that most probably would have happened. But the issue of the memoranda to Cabinet, in the chronology of the process and the hierarchy of the people who are involved in drafting Cabinet memos, the special advisors are not there. They only feature insofar as receiving memos from the cabinet, from the department, reading them and providing advice. But if a significant decision, because once a memorandum is submitted to Cabinet, to withdraw it, you have to provide reasons, and those reasons must not be there are misgivings. The departmental, the people involved with this in the department should have come to me to say, Minister, can you please expunge this name and recommend to Cabinet that we will give you another name.
At paragraph 182, I had no and have no knowledge that Mr. Chwala modified the document elaborating on Mr. Nintani's qualifications, and if so, how many times, to what extent he did and why. I furthermore never had any discussions with Mr. Chwala about Dr. Nintani. I discussed my concerns directly with each of the Minister and Rajesh Gupta. My interaction with Chwala were limited to receiving an email he sent to me on behalf of his principal, which contained information that was destined to my principal. I have no knowledge of the detail of Chwala's involvement in the modification of the document or communication with Nintani. I did not discuss my query with him. I dealt directly with Rajesh Gupta. I would presume that Chwala was tasked by Gupta to send me the information. Do you want to comment on that? Again, there's reference here to a discussion being held with you.
I think I've responded to the issue of the discussion.
All right. At 183, one of the reasons for my concern about the absence of the proof of Dr. Nintani's ability to deliver for SAA in India is that the list of the proposed SAA board was about to serve before Cabinet. I was worried that if quizzed on Dr. Nintani's credentials, the Minister might not have been able to substantiate his rationale for appointing Nintani. I also needed the comfort that Dr. Nintani in fact had the political links in India that he claimed to have had. What do you say to that?
I reiterate, Chairperson, that there is a process that should have been followed, and that had that process through the DG come back to me to say, Minister, please expunge this name, then I would have acted accordingly on the guidance of the people involved in this process. Because in as much as special advisors do provide advice on a wide variety of things, but I also had to respect the internal processes in the department. The DG and the people in the department would have been surprised to know that I have gone ahead to withdraw a name from a memorandum that had come through the process without getting a recommendation from them. And so that is how this matter continued to serve before Cabinet.
So, I mean, what can you remember about Dr. Nintani? What caused you to decide to appoint him as a director?
It was the recommendation which had been brought to me about him, as enunciated in Mahlangu's paragraph 178, with regard to the skills that he was presumed to bring. The skills in this case, not his academic skills, but his ability to influence the Indian government to assist us in achieving the objective of getting better landing slots and developing good relations with the Indian government. That was the argument that was brought forward and that was taken to cabinet as the reason. It did turn out later, I think I might be saying this in my memorandum, in my affidavit. It did turn out later, yes, I actually do say it in my affidavit, that it did turn out later that Dr. Nintani was not what he had been projected to be, and that we then began the processes of having him removed. Yes, I think if you look at my affidavit,
Yeah.
8.7, page 940.
So you say there, I do not recall Mr. Mklangu discussing his concerns about Dr. Ntani or his resume with me.
Yes,
What I do recall is that I was briefed by the department and the board of SAA through a board assessment report that Dr. Ntani was not fulfilling his duties as a director of SAA, including but not limited to not attending board meetings.
yes.
I initiated a process of his removal from the board of SAA, albeit that the actual removal occurred after I had been appointed as the Minister of Home Affairs.
Yes.
Then if we could go back, please, to page 917.
Page, yes, I'm still on 917.
The last paragraph dealing with
Yes.
this 184. In the light of these explanations, I denied that I worked closely with Mr. Chwala, says Mr. Mklangu, to ensure that Ntani was appointed to the SAA board. I had no personal interest in the outcome of Dr. Ntani's nomination or application and simply processed his nomination and application in a manner typical of board appointments. As always, his appointment was considered by others and was deliberated over further, and as a matter of course, the authority and decision-making powers to appoint Dr. Ntani to the SAA board lay in the hands of the minister. He decided to appoint Dr. Ntani to the SAA board with full knowledge of who had nominated him. You've confirmed that?
I deny, Chairperson, that I had full knowledge of who had nominated Dr. Nintani. The nominations to the board were done through a process excluding me, and it would be brought to me from the departmental process, and so I did not have full knowledge of who had nominated Dr. Nintani.
Well, I suppose perhaps I can ask you the question directly. Did you know that Ranesh Gupta had nominated him?
No, I was not aware.
Did you say earlier on, Mr. Gigaba, you or the department, both of you and the department, found out later that Dr. Nathan actually didn't have what you had been made to believe he had that was going to be beneficial to SAA?
Yes, Chair, through the resume that was presented to us, and the argument that he would be able to provide this assistance that we required. But when the board assessment was done, it turned out that he did not have this influence. Not only did he not have the influence, he was also not attending board meetings, not participating in board subcommittees, and then it meant that he was unsuitable for the board, and that's why we initiated the process of his removal.
You know, I want to ask you a question that has arisen in my mind over the months, over the years that the Commission has been listening to evidence relating to the SOEs.
Yes.
when one looks at the evidence that has emerged in the commission of what really happened to a number of SOEs, especially Transnet, ESCOM, the NEL, SAA, during certain periods, because I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush. During certain periods, when you look at the damage that was done to those SOEs because of irregularities in contracts, because of corruption and so on, you ask the question whether the boards of those SOEs during that relevant time were doing their job properly. But also you ask yourself the question whether those boards were populated by the right types of people. And that raises the question in the context of Dr. Nintani, whether the vetting which you say the department would do before people were appointed to the boards was done properly, was done by people who knew what they were looking for, or what was going on. Because in the context of Dr. Nintani, the impression I'm getting is that his name may have been sent to the cabinet even before the department and yourself satisfied themselves that there was proper proof for what was claimed about him. Namely, this ability that he was said to have, that he would influence the Indian government to treat SAA in a certain way. If that was discovered after, one asked the question, why was it not established before he was appointed? Why did somebody ask for proof? Or was the say-so of somebody in the resume or in the CV that was sent to the department seen as enough? Or maybe Mr. Tony Gupta say-so to Mr. Mahlangu? Whether these things were being checked properly. Are you able to say anything?
Yes, Chairperson. And perhaps seeing as I might not finish my evidence today,
Yeah.
I would like to comment a little bit more extensively on this.
No, that's fair enough. Yeah.
When there would be sufficient time and to allow me to do broader reflections.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Because it covered a period where I grappled a great deal with these issues. From a policy point of view, execution point of view, what gaps I observed in the system, some of which we had inherited from a period in time when there was great confusion about the roles, the mandates of SOEs, the ownership model of SOEs, whether they would be privatized or not. Because all of that considered, and the capitalization of the SOEs, all of it considered had a massive impact on how they performed at a later stage moving on. And if you look at them today, you know, the challenges at ESCOM, the challenges at SAA,
And Denel.
Denel, all of these are not just new problems. They've accumulated over time. And I think it would behove that those of us who have been practitioners in the sector should assist the Commission in terms of some of the strategic view that might need to be considered. You don't have to accept what we recommend, but it is only aimed to assist the chairperson to make to consider some recommendations which could assist the process moving forward. But it does seem, commenting without chairperson taking away my right, which I've requested.
I'm granting you the right to later on, when you come back, to deal with it properly.
It does seem, chairperson, that the vetting was not as robust. And it was not only in relation to SAA, it's in relation to a number of SOEs.
Well, it is. I can just tell you, because I was going to mention, maybe I should mention now, that your successor in the portfolio of public enterprises, she was giving evidence here maybe last month, I can't remember. And one of the issues that we raised with her was that the person that was appointed as chairperson of Denel, of the Denel board, after you had left, during her time that she appointed, was an attorney who had been reinstated as an attorney about 3 years or 2, 3 years before that, but somebody who had been struck off the roll of attorneys a few years earlier. And he was not being reinstated as an attorney. He had not been reinstated as an attorney because he won his case on appeal. And the evidence that emerged from your successor was indeed that, if I recall correctly, she may have become aware of that fact after the particular person had been appointed as chairperson of the board. And the question that arose is, how could the department, if it was doing proper vetting, have failed to establish that this person had been struck off as an attorney, even though he had been reinstated? There must have been so many other people, if you wanted an attorney or advocate, who had never been struck off for the reasons that had been given. So, and then of course, I had a former member of the board of SAA who gave evidence here last year. And you smile, so I'm not going to mention her name. But it's known, some of the questions I put to her are known. Of course, you also, we all know that at SAA, Ms. Myeni was there for a very long time, despite the fact that there were lots of concerns and complaints about her leadership or her role. And actually, I recently refreshed my memory reading some document which relates to the evidence of the commission, which suggested that actually during your time as Minister of Public Enterprises, certain directors of the SAA board even wrote to you or copied you on a letter that they had written to her, complaining about her. And on what I was reading, it does not appear that you did anything, but after you had left, your successor seems to have, or rather, let me not say your successor, but what seems to have happened is that those who had complained about her, Ms. Myeni, either resigned or were removed, and she remained. So I mention all of these things to support the point you were making, that it was not just one SOE where there may have been problems. It was a number of them. So that's what I was mentioning. So one looks at all of these things and says, the appointment processes, were they what they should have been? The criteria of people who were being appointed, what were they? Were they the right criteria? Obviously, one must always, as one speaks, remember that it may not be that everybody didn't do well, but certainly the evidence that the commissioners had suggests that a number of boards or people in the force might not have done their job properly. But I grant you the right, you will deal with it comprehensively when you come back.
Thank you, Chairperson.
But I know I interrupted you. You want to finish.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I'm aware that...
oh, yes, in terms of time.
Past 4. I would like, Chairperson, with your permission, perhaps when we come back again, that I pick up on this one.
Okay, okay. No, that's fine, that's fine.
Just the Chair, with your permission, I think we should not close today on the note that the boards were predominantly not doing their work, because there were many very good professionals who did the best, because I think we shouldn't cast aspersions on people. It affects their careers and their professions.
No, that's why I said I don't want to paint with everybody with the same brush, because there may have been people who did good jobs. But in the boards of the SOEs that we have talked about, not talking about others, these ones, during the times that we are talking about, it may be that it's the majority which had a problem, because if the majority were doing the right job, then because the majority decisions are made by the majority, then that would have happened. Certain things would have happened. It may well be that it's a minority of people that were up to the job. It may be. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying it may be. But when you come back, feel free to deal with this issue comprehensively. And if you have ideas, or if you are able to say there were weaknesses, and you are able to say here are the areas where there were weaknesses, and you have suggestions of what should be done, feel free to do that, because it's quite important. Okay, all right. I think because of the time, we have to stop here. Mr. Mayberg, is that so? That's correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Because Mr. Solomon is not able to be with us beyond this time. Mr. Solomon, are you still there?
I am indeed, Chair.
We have to stop now because of your situation. When I say that, I don't want you to feel guilty. You don't feel guilty because I say that. But we need to talk about when we are going to continue and finish. We were hoping to finish today. It hasn't happened. How much time do we need? What's your assessment, Mr. Maida?
Well, I think we're going to need quite a lot of time still,
Quite a lot of time
I mean, so far as the cross-cutting examination is concerned, there are 15 witnesses. We've dealt with one now, Mr. Mtlangu. Of course, he was a longer and perhaps more material witness. But certainly, if we're going to need to deal with the rest of them and
Yeah.
Mr. Gigaba must obviously be afforded the opportunity to present
Yeah, his
whatever
side.
he wants.
Yeah.
I would think we need at least a day.
At least a day. Well, we might have to not look for a day when we'll start in the morning. We might have to take evenings,
Certainly.
maybe 2 evenings. I suspect that if we talk about time next week or even evenings from your side, there is no problem.
Certainly not from mine. I did have occasion to look at your calendar.
Yes, yeah, well, I'm happy you did because I don't have it in front of me.
From what I can see, Chairperson, it's booked up for the whole of the week. I mean, the one thing that we do have is on Monday morning.
Yeah.
What is scheduled is Ms. Mangoma's cross-examination.
Oh, yes.
So I
yes.
suppose one could consider carrying on with Mr. Gigaba instead of dealing with her. But I think it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, because we wouldn't finish him in the morning. And I suppose one can deal now with Ms. Mangoma because we've completed our examination of Mr. Gigaba on that. Yes.
Mr. Solomon, how is your situation next week, generally speaking?
Chair, we had set aside Monday for the cross-examination of Ms. Ngoma.
Yes.
It may be better to try and finish with
Mr.
Gigaba on Monday and use that time.
Yeah.
And then I had made myself available on Wednesday to cross-examine potentially two witnesses, Ms. Kutsia and Ms. Mzimela.
Yeah. Are you going to need to cross-examine them?
Yes. I think certainly Ms. Mzimela, Ms. Kutsia, it seems is a very narrow issue, and that's probably not necessary. But we could keep in touch with Mr. Myberg and let him know, and let the commission know through him.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. On Monday, on my schedule, Mr. Myberg, for the day session, apart from Ms. Mngoma, who did you have?
It's the whole
day.
It's the morning session until lunch is Ms. Mangoma. Then I see that you filled up, if my memory serves me correctly, I think Mr. Seleka and Eskom.
Yes.
But may I just mention that Ms. Kutsia and Mzimela, Ms. Mzimela has apparently contracted COVID, unfortunately. So I think it's probably unlikely that she would be able to be cross-examined on Wednesday.
Yes.
So it may be, Chairperson, that we could work out something, because if we could use the Wednesday slot to continue with Mr. Gigaba's evidence, that would probably make sense.
Yes.
And I don't know if you want him to continue also on Monday morning instead of Ms. Ngoma, because then we could have two bits.
I think it would be better to continue with Mr. Gigaba on Monday. And try and finish with him. Mr. Solomon, are Saturdays out of the question for you for religious reasons?
That's correct, Chair.
Oh, okay, all right.
But Monday does commend itself to me to continue with Mr. Gigaba.
Yes, I think if you could handle this with Ms. Mngoma, Mr. Myberg, let's continue with Mr. Gigaba on Monday.
Until lunchtime?
At least until lunchtime. It's just that I don't remember who is supposed to come up on Monday afternoon and evening.
So it's... We are in the morning, and then at 2 o'clock, it's Masango, Mr. Seleka, and then at 3 o'clock, it's Governor, also Mr. Seleka, and then the evening session is full too.
Is it Governor?
Governor is the 3 o'clock witness, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, Masango would be very short. Masango would be, and in the evening?
The evening you have a whole lot of witnesses, with the evidence leader being Mr. Hali.
Oh, is that Mr. Mabuya Kulu?
Yes.
Miss Ngubane?
Zila,
Okay.
Ngubani.
Okay. I think let's start. Let's do Monday. You know, if everybody agrees, in order to try and maximize the chance of either finishing with Mr. Gigaba, I'm just thinking whether we could start quite early on Monday. I'm even thinking now of 8:30.
It'll be certainly from our side. I mean, perhaps one other suggestion. I think what Mr. Gigaba has to say about the board nominations and the like is important. I don't know if you would have maybe another option is for him to put something in writing. I mean, clearly that's valuable insight.
Yes,
but if that takes an hour or two, then we're never going to get anywhere near being able to finish.
Yes. Yeah, no, that could work. So maybe and it would give him more time.
Yes, and he could deliver it later.
Maybe the answer that you wanted to do comprehensively, maybe you could put that in writing, so that we then continue. And if we don't finish on Wednesday with you, despite starting early, then we could look at the possibility of using Wednesday. Obviously, we'll have to try and find time somewhere for Ms. Mungoma.
And also we have Mr. Benjamin, you'll remember, but he can be a floating witness, I think.
Yeah, no, it would be easy. Okay, let's leave it. Let's continue. Is 8:30 fine with you in the morning? It would be fine with you. Mr. Solomon, is 8:30 on Monday morning fine?
That's in order, Chair.
That's in order. Okay, all right. Let's continue on Monday. Let's start at 8:30 in the morning.
Thank you,
and then
Chair.
we continue. Yeah. Okay, all right. Thank you very much to everybody. We'll adjourn then for today. There is no evening session. We adjourn.